Welcome to the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University's Pavilion. ASU is the number one in the United States for global impact, sustainability, and innovation. ASU also ranked in the top 10 2023 Times Higher Educational Impact rating worldwide for 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are life below water, life on land, clean water and sanitation, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and climate change. Balance Eco are very happy to have the event here today, which is Balance for Biodiversity, a new chapter beyond carbon neutral. I'm going to pass over to the main guy, Damarel, to take you through today's presentation.
A really big thank you to Felix for helping us organise this and to the Arizona State University for hosting us and for you guys coming. So balance. What is balance? Very simple. Balance is an evolution from carbon neutral for offset to balance for biodiversity. And that's really it in a nutshell. So our clients become balanced, proportionate to a carbon footprint, in order to create biodiversity with co-benefits that enhance the lives of local people. And that's a really important step forward. What we've done is worked with background. I've been involved in the carbon markets and the carbon arena since 1988 for my sins, and a lot of people regard them as a sin. I co-coined the term carbon neutral. There is a little piece at the end of Lord Nick Stern opening the Doha COP celebrating Maureen, who ran the Castle Cary pet shop. She purchased the first credit. The carbon market, as no doubt you're all aware of, has got tremendous problems. So there's been the Vera 90% credits not working issue recently. Things like South Pole gone down. You've got a lot of clients who are very embarrassed by buying credits, and there's the distraction element of carbon, because if you're buying a carbon credit and then you're continuing to pollute, and that's a distraction in the first place, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be reducing. But worse still, if you bought a credit that doesn't exist, a ghost credit, then you're actually doing more harm than good. So that's an overview. Carbon market overview is that 80% of it is avoidance, 20% removal. One of the issues there is that you've got to prove that a forest is going to be felled in order to get an avoidance credit. And there's all sorts of mates at logging companies who give people evidence. And there's lovely places like Bhutan who've never got any intention of filling any of their forests who are not able to get that. So avoidance we don't touch, although it's very good to protect long-term forestry because the biodiversity created by standing forest is massive. But here's the thing, we are only working with removals. Oliver here, our in-house attorney and also procurement, we spent the last year searching for carbon credits that could go through the balance methodology. And it's been like looking for rocking horse poo. We estimate that out of the avoidance credits available, about 1.5% of them could go through our system. And of that, we've probably tied up most of that for stock, for balance. Now, what have we done in order to be able to clean up these existing credits and turn them into balance units? Please note the word unit, because a credit suggests that we're going to put the well-being of the planet in the hands of the financial services community. What could possibly go wrong with that? So a unit is a far more benign action. And our clients are becoming balanced, not to make spurious climate claims. They're becoming balanced to create biodiversity and social economic well-being. That's the primary objective. So to address the issue of ghost credits, problem credits, monoculture crop, certainly the permanence issues, we've gone into detail. So we've co-authored a paper. Felix has helped massively, and James Cameron, who unfortunately couldn't be there today, but he's got a video link in. The three of us have co-authored a paper, Balance Methodology, and within that, we've had the great fortune of getting that peer reviewed, and we're published in the International Journal of Sustainable Energy. That's our foundation cornerstone. A number of further academic institutions have engaged in study, including PhD level, which has evolved from the balance methodology. Rome University is doing a modelling of what would the world look like in 100 years' time with existing carbon credits, and what would it look like in 100 years' time if we moved over to balance units. Gloucestershire's doing statistics, Imperial's doing a study on ethical business. Exeter University is engaged in further climate modelling. So the methodology has 6 points to it. of which we would purchase a credit and convert it into a balance unit. So we're not an accreditation body. We're not reinventing wheels that are already spinning. We're cleaning up the credit systems that exist. So that could be Vera, it could be a Plan Vivo, it could be Gold Standard, Woodlands Carbon Code in the UK, etc.
We do a separate 6-point contract over and above the carbon credit verification directly with the project developer.
So how it works, the first thing that we look at is permanence. Now, this is really crucial because we have a 99-year contract with our project developers who are creating indigenous natural forestry for the long term. And 99 years is our minimum protection. We're expecting some of them to go on much longer. But here's the thing. The radiative forcing cycle of CO2's half-life is 50 years up, and it takes another 50 years to come back down. The global standard for carbon credits is 40 years after which there's no legal protection. So we now have a peer-reviewed paper establishing that the old system doesn't work. With permanence, you get lovely things like dead wood and woodpeckers and that sort of stuff, rather than a monoculture crop for plantation and then economic crop and sell. So we don't touch any of that. So here's the next point in our methodology. Indigenous species trees, a planting plan for local genetic stock where possible. We will put a few exotics in because of climate change, and there's modelling on that, but that's the right trees for the right place. We plant where trees were before, not where they weren't, dealing with the albedo issues. And very specifically, the planting plan would be to create long-term amenity forest for communities into the far distant future. The third point in the methodology is Indigenous people's rights. So what we're looking for is 40% of the money, the carbon credit purchase, e.g. the balance unit that we're converting it into, will go to the local community. There would be 15 people in a community signing off year 1, year 3, year 5 to make sure they got it. And then we encourage, because we're going from 40 years to 99 years, we need to make sure that there's income streams. So we would advocate looking at things like permaculture, water catchment enhancement for fisheries, sustainable firewood management, agroforestry, ecotourism,
Apiary or beekeeping.
products that you can make from a forest and sell. But here's the big one that we get directly financially involved with, which is biochar. So biochar, you bake the under canopy in low-cost kilns, you bury it back in the forest, you activate it with fish waste or cow manure, so the mycorrhizal fungal biota has all got a home. You get massively increased crop fertility. All of the permaculture projects give you food you don't need to buy and things you can sell. So there's an economic stream there. And the biochar is sold by the local community, but then we purchase the biochar credits, of which we pay $150 a tonne.
And we convert the biochar credits into balance units.
So they've got a long-term sustainable income by having their projects involved in carbon capture and storage, of which some people are putting several billion into carbon capture things that removed 4,800 tonnes last year. Here we go, using Mother Nature, who removed 2 gigatons of carbon last year, and it's taken 3 billion years for this technology to be with us. So it's part of us. So that's a big one. The one other point is monitoring. What we do, because people are buying balance units to create biodiversity, they're not going carbon neutral to offset. So what we do is we get people to film the projects and report on biodiversity enhancements, such as eagles moving in, or squirrels, or orchids, or snails, or whatever fauna updates, and that gets sent on to the client. So that is packaged up every year, an annual report. We're implicit about biodiversity benefits, not explicit. The reason for being implicit is that we think that biodiversity trading is going to go as wrong as the carbon market, and we want to keep way away from that. But it's logical being implicit that if we do this, and you can see the benefits, we are creating biodiversity, but we're certainly not going to start selling newts and songbirds from our project. The next issue is force majeure, forest burn, which they do. However, biochar is a very good way of taking combustible material out of forests, so it's a good fire protection mechanism. But if there is problems or roads or whatever, there's force majeure. And then there's additionality addressed, which you already get with the credits, and that removes the double counting issues. So we double down on additionality within our contract. And with all of those points taken care of, that creates half a balance unit. And to make it whole, we do one further thing. A town in France can be twinned with a town in England, for example. What we do is plant a tree attached to each ton of balance coming out of the indigenous projects. So that means that what you've got is the establishment of a natural forest near where you live. If you go to work for a balanced business or your client or your customer, you can see the distant project online and its benefit. And then you've also got the visual trees near your customer. And that means we can get carbon money to non-carbon forestry, really important. It means that we can create migration corridors from urban to rural in country along roundabouts, roadsides, etc. So that means that it's also visceral, tactile, visible. I can actually see my trees as well as see the distant project. Carbon lame people think that you buy a carbon credit and somebody goes out and plants you some trees. Au contraire, you have to go out and get the finance and plant them and then get the credit and then put it on the exchange. So we repair sentiment by actually planting a tree attached to each ton. What we've done is we've created infographic 10 seconds for Indigenous people who maybe don't speak English, but they can see how you can create permaculture, agroforestry, beekeeping, water catchment enhancement, and biochar. Our mantra is efficiency, reduction, balance. That's the 3 steps. We don't want people balancing, thinking they can carry on as normal, even though they're balancing to create biodiversity, not buying a carbon credit. But it does the same thing. So we don't want people to think that they can't be efficient. What's the moonshot and what could we do if we did this at scale?
Balance works within a suite of low-hanging fruit solutions using technologies that already exist.
We could get 20% of CO2 out of the atmosphere if we planted a land mass the size of North America that is available for planting globally through the balance methodology. Then you could get another 20% as people move into synthetic meats. 60% of agricultural land gets freed up. The big one is, of course, when buildings get refurbished, there's an existing budget to actually sustainably upgrade them. And people tend to put new versions of old equipment in rather than sustainable upgrades. That's another 10% of the problem.
Renewables are now more cost effective than fossil fuels. So as renewables kick in and take over, that's another 30% of the problem addressed. Electrification of the transport system powered by renewables will address a further 25% of the problem. Personal efficiency, well, there's 8 billion people on the planet and around 7 billion of us can't do much about it. But if 1 billion people could reduce by a tonne, that's a further gigaton. So that's a small but significant step forward. Industrial efficiency and reductions, and certainly compliance with variant necessities to address carbon, will have a tremendous effect as products go on sale that are low emissions, and that could address a further 15% of the problem. Political interaction is essential, and as people demand this, this will increase. The opportunity for countries to put pathways in place that have more compliant sectors could address a further 10% of the problem.
So you can see all these low-hanging fruit areas. So balance is a combination of a suite of activity.
NDCs are a country's nationally determined contributions. An NDC is an aggregated pool of emissions reductions created by a whole country that can be put on sale in the carbon market. We are lobbying for a redrafting of Article 6 in the COP climate negotiations with a view to including balance units within NDCs.
So the country has got a huge asset in its biodiversity and its people.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dan, Felix, and the Balance crew for putting on this event. I'm really very sorry I can't be with you in person. I'm here in the Sierra Leone delegation room recording something for you in advance of your gathering. It seems like quite an appropriate place to do this little video for you. I'm on the delegation of Sierra Leone. I've been working with them for some time. And this is one of the issues that they are really concerned about. How do they get investment in their undervalued natural capital? How do they play some useful part in the sequestration of carbon and build a robust, reliable marketplace? Sierra Leone has every intention of building a robust, well-regulated market. And the question will be, what standards are adopted, and how to work that into their nationally determined contribution and make it fit with the obligations under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is still being negotiated in detail here. I can't really say for sure whether it will arrive at a firm conclusion by the end of this COP28. I certainly hope so. But you can understand that a country like Sierra Leone, and there are many others in the same position, is very keen to be able to draw in investment to deliver the public good of storing carbon, drawing carbon down from the atmosphere, and of course at the same time ensuring that biodiverse environments are maintained and encouraged and land is regenerated where possible, and all the other bits and pieces of economic development are done in such a way that respect and pay attention to the value of natural systems. And when you do that, when you take that approach, you can imagine a country like Sierra Leone increasing its balance sheet value, possibly also reducing the cost of capital when it borrows from international markets, bringing in revenue into projects it would like to develop that otherwise would not get invested in. And that's, in a sense, the whole point of making Article 6 work in practice. So countries like Sierra Leone and many others who have this huge natural capital endowment, which we don't value, and we should, it's in our interest, wherever you live in the world, to have the tremendous resources of the forests and indeed oceans, the mangroves, the various ways in which our natural systems do us a service. We need to value them in our economy, in our financial system, and we don't. We do it partially, marginally, occasionally, but not systematically. Well, one of the things that interests me about what Balance has done is to produce a methodology that at least attempts to pull those parts together. It's been properly peer-reviewed. It does actually have great strength from an ecological point of view. And then, if we can, we work that into the regulatory frameworks at country level. We make it part of the condition if you want to put a project on a marketplace or an exchange, for example, and there are new exchanges being formed all over the world, including in this part of the world, where demand could well be created. I mean, ironically, quite a lot of demand. So what I hope we'll be able to do by the end of this COP28 is have a clearer idea of what the international rules are that enable countries to manage their own domestic carbon regime and build integrity into that and build these vital connections between carbon and nature and natural systems. It's worth reminding ourselves, and I'm sure the audience understands this, but it does need repeating sometimes, the whole point of these markets is to deliver the public good. There's no other point to it. If you build projects that don't actually sequester carbon, or you build projects that do that at the expense of natural systems, you are literally wasting time and money. I mean, that's just an appalling waste of a good idea. So I hope that with the kind of connections that can be made at an event like this, and there's an awful lot of people here, and connections and relationships really do matter. I don't think our rather cynical press quite appreciates the value of just getting together. But one of the things we mustn't do when we do get together is think hard about how we make the right money go to the right places to do the right things. Get flow, of course get flow, but get it well regulated and well directed. And I do think that if we can get this to these methodologies for bringing together carbon and biodiversity to be a feature of a well regulated marketplace, where capital can be sensibly drawn into jurisdictions and value left in those jurisdictions. That's another crucial thing. Not a kind of exploitative, or on the other hand, without expropriation of foreign capital that's come in. In those circumstances, I do think one can be optimistic that there is real benefit from developing projects of this type. And that when we've shown that it can be done, it will be an inspiration to others to do more of the same.
Thank you, James. And the market needs to be safe to be scalable.
And a market that evolved $300 million 2 years ago, $2 billion this year, it's expanding. And what's happening is the big players are buying more of it. It's not everybody's piling in. So the balance idea is to try and make it safe and also relations safe.
And if the market becomes safe, it is therefore scalable.
And there aren't the spurious credits because we've done due diligence on the project. So procurement directors don't have to do due diligence on projects that they're already buying credits from because we've actually done that.
And now we have a balanced case study
Of an actual client showing a project and their rationale for purchasing balance units. This is Ninja Chew, which is one of the larger independents.
Ninja Tune chose balance because it addresses biodiversity, it addresses carbon and climate, and it addresses social engagement.
Ninja Tune has always taken the view that we wanted to be responsible for our environmental footprint.
We take our sustainable operations very seriously, and being a balanced organisation makes us feel we are scientifically in harmony with nature.
Forrester Marston Vale got involved with balance partly because it's a new offer, it's a more rounded offer. We've been involved in the carbon market since the outset. This is the first time we've seen someone do more than just carbon.
Balance has blended carbon removal with biodiversity and social responsibility to create what they call a balanced unit. We're into our third year of being balanced and we've renewed. We just think it's a far more compelling package than just carbon neutral for offsetting.
The methodology and the accompanying peer review status has given us tremendous confidence in what balance is about.
So this is Queenswood. This is a new native woodland created over the last 3 years, and this is where Ninja Tune Records trees were planted.
So Ninja Tune is a case study within the balance methodology, and we're happy to be part of this process and support it because we have that confidence in it.
Just what is it you want to do?
We want to plant trees.
And that is the balance presentation. I think we've got one more funny one. This is Lord Nick Stern opening COP18.
You and the Secretary have a COP to run, and I know that you'll be leaving shortly, but let me just share with you the 25th anniversary of the first carbon trade. If anybody knows an earlier one, please let us know. But it was on this day 25 years ago that Maureen at a pet shop in Castles Carey near the town of Glastonbury, Somerset in the UK, after a carbon audit of the activities of her pet shop, was sold by Daniel Murrow a carbon sequestration certificate, and the tree involved in carrying through that sequestration was planted and is alive and flourishing in Somerset. So Daniel Morel, if you're here, could you stand up? Thank you very much. And just a few years after that, the Rolling Stones made the first carbon-free rock tour of the world. So occasionally positive things do happen, however difficult this may seem. So that's the celebration.
So that's balance and the history and how we got here and what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felix and Dan. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion up here now, and then hopefully we'll have time for a couple of questions from the audience as well. I think your presentation gives a great idea of the kind of overall intention, and I'd just like to dig into a bit more of some of the details. I think firstly to understand how balance units will interact with the traditional carbon market a bit better.
Okay, so how it interacts with the traditional carbon markets is pretty much it's drawn a line, it's a step forward, it's saying carbon neutral and offset is finished, it's reputationally damaged. If I buy a carbon credit for a business, I've got to say my carbon credits are better than yours, and that's just not a place to win from. So it interacts with the carbon markets in a refresh and a move forward. It's a way of making safety for brands to get involved and people to get involved because they're going to work. How it interacts is that we purchase existing credits generated by existing systems. So we're not reinventing any wheels, but we're turning carbon credits into balance units against the 6-point methodology. So people actually get income from their projects. They're going to want to look after them. Biodiversity is created. And it's also absorbed a quantifiable tonnage of carbon, but people don't really trust the quantifiable tonnage of carbon anymore. So this way we make a market capable of expanding because it's a new way of entering.
Okay, there's a few things I want to dig into there. And the first one is credibility, which you're talking about, right? There's been a big loss of credibility of the term carbon neutral. There's been some big articles which have shown that, carbon offsets aren't always what they say they are. So how do you plan to kind of tackle that issue?
I think that you're going to see legislation happening that will, in a sense, deal with that. So, for example, in Kenya, they've just passed the second law that deals with climate change. It was announced at Climate Week, and it's got some interesting aspects. So some of it very similar to what we're talking about. They're looking at community benefits, up to 40% of the amount of money going to the community that's happening like that. But I was intrigued and I printed it off so I got it right. what happens if you're misbehaving? So, according to the Kenyan law, the Act has also introduced offences such as conducting unauthorized carbon trade willingly, giving false or misinformation knowingly for environmental or financial gains in the carbon market investment, manipulating carbon credit measurements to claim additional measurements, engaging in money laundering through carbon trading, knowingly selling carbon credits to unauthorized entities, and failing to maintain carbon records. Now, the penalty for this is up to 10 years in prison and $3 million. So I think that a lot of people are going to see the Kenyan Act as a really interesting one. And the way it's written makes what Balance Eco has put forward a very attractive proposition. I think everyone is now worried about the issue of greenwash. OECD had a conference at the beginning of the year, and they're worried to see how many of the financial offers are actually real. And I think we're trying to make that into something that not only we can be proud of, but actually can deliver. And I think linking biodiversity and climate was absolutely crucial. And in a sense, we are about biodiversity, of which we're going to help climate as well.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. That's extraordinary. 10 years. Quite right, too. Also, just to add to that, in the UK, for example, you can buy a Woodlands Carbon Code, a PIU, a promissory unit, that takes 30 to 40 years to become an actual unit. So you're not allowed to say that you're carbon neutral under British law until the credit's matured, which takes anything from 15 to 40 years. So that's a step in the right direction. The other fascinating development, which is even more powerful, is CDRC, which is the new EU law that comes in on the 1st of January this year. And it's like every SME, I think anybody with more than 10 staff has to account for their carbon, and then they have to do something about it. And in the EU, you're not allowed to use carbon neutral as a term. So basically, the term has been outlawed, which is really helpful. It's very helpful for us as well because our clients can become balanced. And why they're doing it to create biodiversity, we're not focusing on the climate claims. And that's really important. So we're not putting our clients in the firing line of having to get into really complicated arguments about whether that's an offset and whether it's not, and whether you've done this, that, and the other. Line drawn, off we go, balance unit, biodiversity, social engagement, and climate in an ethical way.
Okay, so just to make sure I've understood then, because you are using projects that have already been certified as carbon offset projects, right? And then balance is an additional layer that ensures a high value of integrity and biodiversity, which is a whole extra dimension, and social engagement. So the companies that are purchasing it, although these credits are technically offset credits, they have been certified, companies aren't buying it and claiming any offsets from it.
That's correct. It's like we're doing with the implicit and explicit with biodiversity, because we don't want to get into biodiversity trading. So our clients are being implicit. Look, I bought this balance unit. It's proportionate to a carbon footprint. It's a tonnage that I do. It's a way of following the money. So the way that we communicate is totally different. Why are you balanced? To create biodiversity. And we're giving jobs to people. Oh, and by the way, it also soaks up carbon, but it's not front of house. So it's a reframing of we should know, or I should know. I coined the term carbon neutral, and I think it was a problem right at the very start. I didn't actually like it. Carbon neutral suggests something's happened immediately, and actually where it's ended up is it might happen over time if you're lucky. So this is a refresh and a new approach. And there's a lot of power in words.
One of the reasons I asked that question is to also understand if you see balance units as always associated with carbon offsets, because as you said, there's certain projects that would be amazing to channel finance to that don't necessarily qualify as offset credits, but would certainly meet all of the criteria of your methodology.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see why we're also planting the extra tree, which actually it's a tree, but if that tree has money attached that goes to somebody who's doing a project that wouldn't receive carbon finance and creating biodiversity local. So that's really important. And yes, absolutely, if an organization wanted to really go for it and purchase balance units to create biodiversity, they don't have to do it proportionate to a carbon footprint at all.
Right, because I work in Latin America, in
Yeah.
Brazil specifically, there's a lot of communities there that are doing great work protecting nature, but the process for getting a carbon credit, getting certification, hugely expensive. So I'm wondering if this could be a way to also channel finance to communities, and also if you can talk a bit more about how you think about working with communities and indigenous people.
So the second one a little bit first. Dan was involved with one of my former students in doing the outreach to Indigenous groups. So I think he probably would answer that better than me. But one of the things I don't think we mentioned is that we would be using Indigenous trees. We wouldn't be doing monocultures. And I think that's also an important aspect. Similar to how the Kenyan Act has gone, to do anything, you have to have a community development agreement with the community to operate. We very much approached it from a stakeholder engagement. It's actually parallel what we've been suggesting to what the Kenyan government has put in. So I think those are important. And I think how far you can get finances coming in just for the biodiversity, I think that's definitely possible, but we're very early in our launch. What we're looking to do is to see whether or not perhaps we can get a couple of the stock exchanges to designate this as something that they would see as a contribution. And we would perhaps ask a country, maybe a country like Sierra Leone, to pilot it out so that we could see where they were. And the point on Bhutan, I thought was a really important one, which is they're not cutting down trees. So how can we make sure that we can contribute to that as well?
The thing is that the processes involved in carbon accreditation are expensive, time consuming, and you've got to actually plant a forest and then 3 years later get the credit. And it's a real pain and it's a real block. So there's two ways to look at that. Is we can flip it that the extra tree from the client can get planted within one of these projects and they have their balance unit coming out from somewhere else. And that's something we can do immediately now. The second thing is I think we've gone past startup, we're kind of like early stage. And what we've had is a lot of really good conversations with really patient capital. There is good money out there. What that means is that we can develop what you call an ex ante fund, and there is significant capital potentially coming available to do exactly that. And the net effect of balance being successful is biodiverse forests get created at scale that actually have long-term economic value for social engagement. So if we can figure out ways to get these systems working, which is why I feel very supported to have people like Felix and James Cameron, and there's many others who are attached to the project who are really big brains. Soon now, there'll be quite a few surprises as how we can evolve this.
And as long as balance is tied to carbon offsetting, do you see it working across voluntary and compliance markets? And how are you anticipating that if we get anything from the Article 6 negotiations this week?
Okay.
Because at the moment you're attaching balance to what's already been certified as a
yeah, okay. So we're moving on from that. We're creating balance units for biodiversity. So we don't see ourselves as attached to the carbon market. I think we've let that one go.
Okay.
But what we're using is why throw the baby out with the bathwater when there's some really good systems that are already in place? We found a way of following the money. Now, if you wanted to give money to somebody to create biodiversity and create social income for people and then also sort out carbon, you'd have disparate caches going in all over the place and it would be really, really complicated. And it's not very sexy as a package. I bought a ton of this, that, and the other, or I've paid for this school, or I've planted those trees, or those parrots are doing really well, and whatever. So we simplified the whole thing, divorced ourselves from the carbon trading aspect of the carbon market. We retire credits on behalf of clients, convert them into balance units. So we're using the very best of what's out there and then putting in the due diligence and the extra protections through our methodology. So do we see that going compliant? Absolutely, yeah. And do we see it evolving? We do.
No. I mean, all of well, I think the thing is that we are assuming that we get an agreement on Article 6, seeing what's happened here and in the EU, we are creating a regulatory framework, and there'll be proper penalties for people who don't behave in that market. And that, I think, has been long overdue. It's taken a long while to even get. I had high hopes before we came here that there'd been a deal on Article 6. It clearly wasn't as advanced as it should have been. But I think if we get that through and then countries are starting to put proper regulatory frameworks in there, then it's only going to play towards the kind of approach that Balance Eco, and there are a number of others that are looking at the same areas. And I think that's a very exciting place to be, because we're suffering from huge losses of biodiversity. So this is a way of becoming an engine of change for both of these.
I wanted to come back to a couple of the points around working with communities. There's a couple of sticky points that always come up when I'm talking to people about projects. One is the contract length. So I know that you're looking at obviously like a better definition of permanence with more integrity, which is great on the project side. But how do you manage that on the contract side with communities? Because there's obviously questions of intergenerational justice there.
You're right, it is fraught with complexity. So, what we do is we don't have a contract with the Indigenous community. What we have is a contractual obligation for the project developer to transfer 40% of the cash to this community. And we need to see year 1, year 3, year 5 that a large group of people have signed off that the project's working. So that's on the financial side. The second thing is, you might have noticed the infographic films of things you can do. One of the problems with carbon is the neo-colonialism of it and the avoidance credits. I mean, imagine Indigenous people got cleared off land just recently for, I think it was Gucci was the purchaser. But you can imagine how awful that trail is attached to what can go wrong. So what we're saying is that there are, again, we're implicit rather than explicit. We're saying implicitly, these are the things that you can do to earn money from your project. And if you've got beekeeping, if you've got water catchment enhancement for fisheries, if you've got agroforestry, permaculture, forest products that you're selling, biochar, especially, which we can get a financial thing going, you're using the Indigenous community for carbon capture and storage. Brilliant. Pay them to do a wonderful job that significantly improves soil fertility. And with all of that going on, you're not going to want to sell your land or your forests in 40 years' time because you've got an income coming. Instead of people being poor, my grandmother needs a hip replacement. And what am I going to do? I'm going to have to fell that lovely tree in order to pay for that. You've got the forest is creating all these products and all these things. That means that maybe grandmother didn't need a hip replacement because she was walking around with a healthier all of her life. Being anecdotal here, but the point being that schools and hospitals and computers and all the things that you need becomes available through a financial process from the forest.
Just to add to that again, I definitely recommend people look at the Kenyan law. They've built in a community development agreement where 40% of the income goes to the community, and therefore it's a legally based thing. So what we're operating in is this period before things become really much better regulated. And so that period will probably be 5 to 10 years for some countries. But the EU set legislation. We've now got legislation in Kenya. I'm sure other African countries are going to be looking at that, and they're building in that agreement that thing. Now, what they're not doing is building in the 99 years. And so that's part of the conversation we would like to build into the future.
And I wanted to just ask about benefit sharing as well, because I think you guys have set it at 40%. I've seen projects ranging from 5% in the Brazilian Amazon to 100% from an indigenous project in New Zealand. So how did you arrive at 40%?
Well, it says in our contract a minimum of.
Okay.
So that's a baseline. It feels like a baseline standard, but you're absolutely right. Why shouldn't an Indigenous community get 100%? And if
They are the project developers themselves and doing everything and selling it. So yeah.
So if they generate the units, then they would get 100% of it. And again, this is really important that we have that facility in place to avoid any carbon neo-colonialism aspect creeping in. So we would encourage that massively.
Right. And finally, before we maybe take some questions from the audience, if you could talk a bit more about the monitoring, which is obviously another crucial element of running a successful project.
What happens with the project at the moment is it generates a credit and it goes up on an exchange and that's it. And it's buy and forget.
Well, a lot of companies are also talking about introducing digital DMRV, right?
That's right. Distributed ledger is going to be fantastic as it evolves in order to do this. And we're looking at that in detail. What we're doing at the moment, however, is much lower tech, although we will be moving as that evolves. What we're doing is we're getting an implicit, not an explicit, an implicit biodiversity report annually from the project, which would involve the local community filming and spamming us
So
with good.
from the community, not from the developers.
That's right. That's if we're looking at indigenous and community-led projects. That's what we're moving towards. I think we've got one project coming on stream in Mexico and another one in Brazil. The majority of our stock at the moment is in the Scottish Highlands.
Right, yeah.
We're looking at how this model works within the indigenous and local community. So we're setting up the systems to do that.
Just before we go to the audience, you're already running some projects. How close is it to scaling at the moment?
We're very close. I mean, what this is about is our methodology. We wouldn't want to go out unless we had a peer-reviewed methodology, which we've now got. We're being published in the International Journal of Sustainable Energy. That's our peer review status out. We're systems testing at the moment, and we're going to launch Balance next year. In the background, we are scaling. We're working mainly with going back to our roots. We're working with music and film and arts specifically to get the project out, to give it a cultural note that Ninja Tune Records is our client. And they're great people. So a big thank you to Matt Black and Dinaz and Peter for really helping us. And they've been behind us for 3 years now, renewing and watching us evolve our processes and getting involved and being a case study. So having a client like that who's also paying for balance units, that's enabled us to plant the trees and do the projects that can become the case study. So as I say, we're early stage, we're not startup, and off we go to scale. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Do we have any questions from the audience?
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful discussion and presentation. And I really like the word ethical in your vision and in your mission. You said right now social engagement, social involvement is a crucial thing in scaling the campaign maybe, or a whole business, entire business. You said you're dealing with music and filming right now. I'm actually founder of Sustainability Arts Media Production Company. I'm just wondering, how do you guys use words of your vision to transform mindset of your key clients? I'm wondering really, I've heard the presentation. 2 questions. I'm wondering, first, you work B2B only or B2C as well? And if you work B2C, what keywords would you plan to use to achieve your long-term strategy? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. And yes, the best way to create a movement is art. We don't want to be a brand, it's a movement. And art and music is a great way of attracting minds. Yes, balance in business is what I described, which is all up and running and working. The other aspect that we've got is called Balance My Life, which is a consumer campaign. What that is again, we'd like to keep things simple. So you don't have to go through a carbon calculator and do all the hours of time you need to find all receipts and whatever. What you do is you say, what's your household income? And then your dual or your household income. And then we've got a methodology from Ecometrica based on what that impact is and how many balance units you need to buy. So you buy, you put your extra tree near where you live, you put your balance at just like a business, but on a smaller scale. That's designed for us when we've got companies who've got FMCG or big membership or large customer bases to put it out. We're not going to run a great big consumer campaign because it's really expensive. So we have a facility. But the messaging we've thought through, the messaging is the same across everything. It's one by one, ton by ton. The mantra is efficiency, reduction, balance. And how do we do it? We plant and protect. And that's our messaging.
And are you not going to tell them about the Rolling Stones book?
Oh, the Ronnie Wood. Yes, okay. So the Rolling Stones became carbon neutral in my old incarnation of my old business back in the day. In 2003, that was the Steel Wheels tour. And we planted them a lovely forest. There was 2, actually. One up in the Isle of Skye, which is right next to the Joe Strummer's Memorial Forest, which is the Rolling Stones forest up there doing really well. And then there was another one with Ronnie Wood that was planted in Mozambique that was in a war zone and we couldn't monitor it. And there was all sorts of shenanigans went on. So 2015, at my own cost, I replanted the Ronnie Wood with some shaman indigenous people in Argentina with a cloud milking project where you get transpiration from forestry and it milks the clouds, and then you've got water catchment enhancement, fisheries and permaculture and all that sort of stuff. So that's now a 7-8-year-old project, the Ronnie Wood, and it's bringing real benefit to local people in Argentina.
Thank you very much for this insightful panel. I am Kemo Fati from the Gambia, West Africa. I am a movement leader for the Great Green Wall Frontline Initiative. Over the years, we've been really tied up in some loopholes at the government level As a matter of fact, when we were heading to the Africa Climate Week, we actually thought that carbon credits is becoming a false solution. Now that we're talking about ethical issues in this, our government currently has a non-disclosure agreement with a Danish company. I will not be speaking of the name, to purchase all of our carbon credits at $4.5 per ton. This is making us sick. That's not the issue. They actually get into this deal for some kind of pre-financing. And right now, when I looked at your model, you talked about water conservation, biochar. At local level, we have established our own seed banks. We understand that the government can sell, of course, their credits that they own. But when it comes to land degradation, more than 150,000 hectareages is within our communities. And we've built a movement of more than 295 villages. Of course, we haven't taken any pre-financing from any of these people, but we are hoping to actually, when she said 100% of their credits, because when we ask the government what is the benefit sharing mechanism, and this particular deal is actually directly linked to the Red Plus. So when we talk about these issues, I want to understand what is the difference? How can communities be able to unlock financing to be able to develop their own carbon credits without having to lace with businesses or other exploitative ventures? Like, these are our lands. We know how to restore them. What we need is just resources to do so. And in providing those resources, why should so much profit, or why should it be purchased at so little at the expense of local communities? What can be done to bring this to light and ensure that this exploitation does not continue long into the future?
Well, thank you for that. My goodness me, that's a prime example of carbon colonialism. That's exactly what we're talking about and what our DNA is set up to address. So, how can you unlock the capital and avoid the problem? Well, the Red Plus system or Vera or any of these things, all they are is an accreditation system. That's all. So the capital value of the credit is held with the project developer where the money flows. So what you need to do is work with the project developers or the landowners and then get the credits verified. And if you can work with us where you've got them verified by them, but we've also got all the other social aspects that we've just talked about in the presentation, then we can put them on sale for you and get them to good actors who are ethical, not loggers or people in the oil industry who've moved into carbon. We've put the well-being of the planet in the hands of the financial services community, and here's a prime example of it going wrong again. I'm flabbergasted, but I'm not surprised at all. We would love to help you with that issue. I'd be very proud to be involved with you if that was possible. But it is fixable through our methodology.
Just a thought, because there is also some traction built on biodiversity, and we had an international conference and so on. There's also movement to have natural woodlands restored, and therefore, trees are being saved and so on. So is it possible to connect the two, that the benefits would be both restoring the forest, but also preserving the biodiversity?
The whole approach of balance is to do exactly what you're talking about. So it is starting from the biodiversity, not starting from the tree itself. So I think you came in slightly late after the presentation, but you'll be able to get a copy of that. But I think the whole work that Dan has done and that we've been prepared, James and I and others and Oliver, to the reason we want to do this is because we think this approach is the right approach, and it actually builds in the community, ensures that there's funds coming to the community. It builds in a longevity that doesn't exist at the moment to the level that it needs to. And I think if we're successful, and there are other equivalents to balance just starting up, because everyone's realizing this is the space we need to be in if we're going to address this seriously, then my hope is that by the time we come back to Azerbaijan at COP29, then we'll be able to say, look, we're now on the road to this. And I think that will be part of the success.
So it's biodiversity creation balance units purchased in order to create a better environment that helps people. That's the rationale for purchase, which is far more benign than going carbon neutral to offset so you can carry on polluting and a distraction to the whole market. So that's at the core of the whole initiative. And thank you for asking the question. And that was what was addressed at the beginning. I think the other point that's really key that maybe you missed at the beginning is that existing carbon credits have no legal protection after 40 years. The half-life of CO2 is 50 years up, 50 years down, radiative forcing cycle. So we now have a peer-reviewed paper that is established, scientifically established, that carbon credits don't work. And that's huge. Whereas our units shift to benign long-term cycle with the idea of creating, the forest of Marston Vale that you saw there, the lease on the land is 840 years. So a 99-year contract with people like that. In America, we've got easements for park creation, and we're finding it. It's been really hard work, Oliver, hasn't it? But we're finding it. And I think that as we get popular, our hope is that projects get ready to this standard. And then the net effect is that we get balanced forestry created at scale for the long term and shifting away from the damage that's being done by monoculture crop, fast credit systems, and clearing indigenous people off land for carbon farming in the avoidance sector, which is so alarming. Thank you.